So another part of translation then, in terms of reading well, it also has to read correctly. So you should obviously spend some time before you start any translation, uh, analyzing the terminology first, so you have the right terms and you know how a customer actually wants something to be phrased, right? So if you look at the example, how do you translate wire by wire? Is that a company wire that makes wire, or is that something where we make something one wire at a time, wire by wire? So definitions, and you need to be very careful how you translate. You can't just translate word for word, right? Um, so sometimes you might take a word for granted, but it's not necessarily correct. So if you look at it, there's a term here you use in social welfare here called rates of payment, right? So and in that form, so how do you translate that, right? So there's a couple of different ways depending on, if you go back to number three, how someone is going to use it, right? So you could just translate it literally and just translate the term. It's the rate of the payment that you get paid, right? Now, the other way you could do it is you could leave it in English, because it's an actual form. So let's say there's a French person walks into the Irish Social Welfare Department and they ask for the rates of payment form. That's what they're going to ask for. They're not going to ask for the French form, the name, because if they ask for the form in French, the person in the social welfare department won't know what they're talking about. So then that leaves you then with the third option, which is potentially that you translate the English term, and you either leave the English term in brackets or you leave the French term in brackets, right? So again, these are sometimes discussions that you have with customers. So the idea then is that a French person can come in, they look at the documentation, and they know that, oh, this is the form I need to ask for, and they have it in French, so they understand what they're looking for. But then when they go to the counter and they say, right, I want a rates of payment form, please. So it's very specific, and that's sort of what something that can be very good. So um, that's very important to understand. So when you talk to people, your customers are, and it's like ourselves, if you've got queries on terms like this, ask in advance. We spend a lot of time working with our customers trying to work out what the best way is to translate and how they would prefer it translated before we send the projects on to the translators. We'll always typically give you translation instructions around how to do things like this. There's also things in terminology, like there's legal terms. So leave to remain is another one that's important. So where people are, for immigration law here, leave to remain is a term, and that will finish up in court. So when you translate it, you need to know that you're translating it correctly, and that the legal term is still intact when it's translated. So again, the more work you do in advance, the better your translation is. So the one thing then to take away here is, right, don't deliver projects with lots of questions. That's why we have a Q&A system, right, that we allow translators to ask us questions, and we'll ask questions to you, and we'll share our information as well. So asking questions up front earns you credit, right? So we know, like, if you're all good translators ask questions, because we know that you're asking questions for a reason. You're trying to get an understanding of what we want to do, what we want, why we want it, how we want it delivered, and you're fine tuning your skills to what our customer requirements are. So remember that. So asking questions up front earns you credit.